When you see leaders who tend to get the most things done, these are the people that move stuff. They're oftentimes using this word currencies that other people aren't using. And I think especially relationship currency and this personal currency, which these for most of our listeners are maybe even going to sound a little bit odd. Like, what does that mean? Got to continue thinking about that. And those two are very widely underdeployed. And, almost everybody is offering task help, and you can see how visibility gets dangled out there a lot. But almost nobody's paying in that patient, accumulated kind of trust that comes from showing up consistently.
Welcome to You Might Try This, a podcast about learning how to lead without losing yourself along the way. Hosted by executive coaches Stacey and Cade Cowan. This show draws on 25 years of experience working with high-level leaders and brings those lessons down to earth. If you're navigating leadership for the first time, managing people, questioning old rules, and trying to build a career that actually feels good, you're in the right place. This is You Might Try This, honest leadership advice for ambitious people who still want to sleep at night.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to You Might Try This, the show for leaders who are figuring it out in real time. I'm Stacey, and as always, Cade is here with me.
Hi there.
There's a thing almost every new leader believes when they get the title, and that's that the title is going to give them power, that the org chart is going to give them power. But the day that they start leveraging the power of that title, they find out something that they didn't expect, which is that the title and that place in the org chart isn't really that powerful after all. While it might have bought them maybe some influence and a meaning, it didn't really buy them the room. Cade, you've got a great story that I want to start with because it illustrates this point perfectly.
Yeah, I do. It's an old story because it goes back all the way to 1959. So two social psychologists, the University of Michigan, John French, Bertram Raven, they set out to do something that no one had really done before, not at least in a clean way. They tried to map the actual sources of power that exist inside of organizations, and they came up with 5 and later added a 6th. And the list is pretty simple. I mean, it almost sounds obvious now, but at the time it was quite a breakthrough. So if you look at these sources of power, so 3 came with the title. Like you said, the org chart gives you power. So that is true. There are 3 sources of power that can point back to that position that you hold. So 1 they called legitimate power, and that comes from the position itself. The other is reward, so the power to grant reward, so you can give people things that they want. And then the third was coercive, the opposite. You can also take things away. And so again, they show up on the org chart. They show up the day you get the job, the day you become a manager. These things are true for you. But the other 3 did not come with the title. So expert power. So this is you actually know things that other people would benefit from knowing. And if you remember going back to the trust equation, that's going to be highly related to your ability to establish trust. So expert power. Secondly is referent power. So this is people want to be in your orbit. They identify with you. They would follow you out of the building. There's something about you that draws people to you. And then lastly is informational. So you've got access to what other people don't have access to. So you've got these 6 bases of power. And the thing that I think is probably most useful, Stacey, most useful finding from this is that the ones that came with the title, legitimate power, reward, and coercive, they produced compliance. So they got people to do the thing. But the ones that come more slowly, that you earn and acquire over time, and of course, that's the expert power, the referent power, the informational power, that's what gets you commitment. So that actually gets people to want to do the thing. And there's a big difference in getting people to do the thing and getting people to want to do the thing.
Those are 2 totally different outcomes. If you're thinking just about what's the behavior, did they do it? That's one thing. But if they wanted to do it versus having to do it, those are really different outcomes.
That's right. Compliance, that's what shows up while you're watching. And it also stops when you're not watching. But commitment, That's what shows up whether you're in the room or not. So that keeps moving once you leave the building.
I'm thinking about one of the conversations we had way back in one of our first episodes. I think it was episode 3. And Cade, you said something. You said, leadership is what happens in the room when your body is not in it. And I think that's a little bit about what we're talking about now. It's kind of the same point, is the title shows up when you're physically there. But pull, or getting people to want to do something, that shows up whether you're physically in the room or not.
That's right. And that's the question this episode's really focusing on, is if the things that move people aren't the things that the org chart gives you, then where does the actual power come from? And what are leaders' misunderstanding about power, especially when they get that first role?
Makes a lot of sense.
So let me tell you what's quietly true about title-based authority that almost no one tells new leaders. And that is, every time you use it, you actually deplete it a little bit. It's not unlimited. The title gives you kind of an opening balance, but when you pull rank so you make somebody do something because of who you are and not because of the relationship that you've built with them or what you've earned, you draw on that account, and the account doesn't necessarily get replenished. Not that type of power.
No, it's like a bank account that doesn't accept deposits. It only accepts withdrawals. So if you've been pulling out of it for, 6 months, you don't get to go back and put things in, right? The way you put back into the account, if you will, is by not really making a withdrawal in the first place.
That's right. And there are basically 3 reasons, Stacey, that a title authority or power erodes fast. And I want to name them because each one is something that leaders miss. So first, the room notices it when you say things like, I'm the head of the team. Now, most people have the emotional intelligence not to say that out loud, but they can actually say it in not out loud ways through actions. So, when you send a calendar invite with no context for 4:30 p.m. on a Friday,
everyone loves that.
A, you're douchey, and B, you're sending a message, I'm the head of this team. When you take the seat at the head of the table, just because it's there and that must be mine, you're sending that message. When you CC your boss on something that doesn't really know it, but it shows that you've got this direct line, these are all ways that you're sending the message, I'm the boss here, and it depletes that account. So you do it a lot, you deplete it a lot. You're telling them that you couldn't, you're telling them that, again, over and over, I'm the boss here.
Well, and I'll add that I think, unfortunately, your team is doing real math, right? In the background, they're kind of calculating, right? They're tracking how often do you fall back on that title. And the first time I'm like, okay, it's one off. The third time, however, they're like, I'm making a story about how Cade leads, right?
Yes.
And once that story gets in place, it's a little bit hard to unwind.
Yes. So secondly, and this is the one that I think most new leaders run into and they don't really see, like, compliance is a low ceiling. You're not really going for the brass ring if that's all you're working to produce. People will do what you said, but they won't do more than what you said. And the work that gets done exactly at the spec line, you know what I mean? It's just enough. That's work that people do for you because of your title. But the work that's better than the spec, the part that shows how you're creating leverage because of your leadership and the relationships that you're developing, that really only shows up when somebody wants to do something you need them to do. There's that difference again between doing the thing and then wanting to do the thing. So you can usually see this in execution quality, like when the same team produces very flat, on spec, and it might be technically correct work for one leader, but then they do meaningfully better work for another. Like, that gap is the pull gap, to use that word that you used earlier. The first leader got compliance, the second leader got commitment.
Yes. And the leader who's only getting compliance, the challenge is they actually don't know that. They may not know what the pull type of leadership would have given them because the work is showing up, right? They're getting their team to do the deliverables, if you will, and the deadlines are getting hit and the dashboard looks green, because dashboards report compliance just fine.
Yes. And then the third reason, Stacey, and I think this is the most important one, and this is especially true for anybody who wants to grow past that first leadership role. And that is, your title does not travel with you. It may work inside your direct line. It may work with your team or direct reports, the people that report to you. But outside that, your title does not travel. Cross-functionally, a peer who's got that same manager title or director title as you, they don't care. Anyone in a different department, anybody you might need a favor from, your title is worth practically nothing. It's a name badge. Hello, my name is. It doesn't say you should do what I'm asking.
No, it doesn't. And this is actually interesting because this is where I see new leaders in particular run into a bit of a wall because they've spent the first, let's say, 6 months in the role, kind of establishing their credibility, their trust, and let's be honest, their authority with their team. They've learned how to lead their team, so to speak. And they've probably gotten a little more comfortable with the title authority that the title gives them on that team. Then all of a sudden, they need to go out and represent their team. They need to get something from another department, another function, another area in the organization, another peer, or let's say even a vendor or partner outside the organization. And the move that they've been using with their team stops working, right? They can't get what they need done with someone laterally in the organization that they could with their team. And they may not understand the difference between getting compliance and getting influence. And so they can get a little stuck. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing I've been reflecting on this a little bit is that what's interesting is the leaders who are usually most fluent with using their title, who use it most easily, if you will, are usually the ones who hit that wall the hardest because they didn't have to learn how to diversify the things, the ways they can influence people. This particularly happens when people are promoted early on. And so they've been working with having authority. And then all of a sudden they've got to use a different move and they don't know what that move is. So when they have the title and they're trying to go do something else, they haven't really learned how to influence and they don't really have anywhere to go, if you will.
Yeah. And by contrast, the leaders who built pull earlier learn to pull people toward them, through those other sources of power, usually because they had to, right? They didn't have that direct authority. They didn't have the title. They're the ones who can actually work beyond boundaries and maybe not even notice it. They've kind of been doing this thing the whole time. It's really kind of interesting to see.
It is. And I think that, the people who got their first leadership role, like I was saying, early in their career, sometimes have less pull 5 years later than people who got, let's say, promoted or got the authority later, because the people who were promoted early got handed a title before they had to learn how to move people without one. They really don't know how to do it.
It's the revenge of the nerds, isn't it? It's the revenge of the late bloomers. So you might have skipped over for the promotion, but you learned to be really crafty. You learned how do I actually get things done without the title? And it actually serves you really well. And it is a real pattern. It's not a personality problem for those that did get promoted earlier. It's just kind of like a training problem. They never got the reps in of how do I develop this pull?
That's right. I was thinking just a quick story to share, Cade, as we're talking about this is I was working with vice presidents in a large, well-known organization. And those vice presidents, because the company had done so well, had made a lot of money. And so many of them were, as they were approaching retirement, trying to think about what they might do next. And many of them indicated that they had these sort of, I'm going to call them fantasies, dreams of, starting a nonprofit. And I remember thinking, you have no idea how power and influence and the arrogance of assuming you could transition from one, because they were in an environment where they had so much built up authority from their titles, their power, that if they tried to move into a different environment, I was like, they're really going to struggle. And I thought I'd much rather have someone who worked in a, let's call it resource constrained environment early on, who then transition to using authority than the other way around, because those people learn how to hustle and how to influence people and connect with them in some of the ways we're talking about much more fluently than the other way around. Right?
Well, I don't know about you, Stacey, but I've been in like talent succession conversations where, When people say, man, could we put this person on a board? Because they're really smart, but they don't know how to necessarily work without that title. So if you put them on a board full of other powerful people, they got to figure out, how do I work when the title means nothing? Because I'm also sitting here with a very impressive, powerful person in their own right. So
that's right. That's right. So let's talk about that. If it isn't the title, let's spend some time on how do you actually get people to do things? We've talked about the difference. Let's talk about what makes it work. What do you do when you don't have a title to lean on? And Cade, I'm thinking about some of the research from Alan Cohen and David Bradford. They were at Berkeley for a while, and they wrote the famous book, Influence Without Authority, sort of the classic text. Mm-hmm. And I do find that, it's older, but it has some really useful information in it for practicing managers, right?
Listen, and all things have lots of useful information.
Don't we? Don't we?
I think so.
What their core insight, if you will, was that influence is an exchange. And I think the way they put it is every time you successfully influence someone, you've offered them something they value in exchange for what you're asking for. And what you might offer doesn't have to be what you might expect.
Right. And it's usually what they call currencies, right? So let me lay out this idea of currencies in the plainest version that I can. Fancy word, but there are 5 currencies that matter most of the time. So currencies, what can we offer someone in our attempts to influence? So one is mission. So you're giving a person the opportunity to connect to something bigger than the task. So I might be influencing someone and I am talking to them about how their work is going to make a difference in the company, how it is integral to the initiative that we're attempting to drive. So I want to connect them to that mission. Number 2 is task help. So making somebody's day easier. So removing a thing from their plate, giving them resources, information, a faster path. So I'm dangling out some help for them. 3 is visibility. So how can I make them look good? So can I make sure that the right people see what they did? How can I help them think about this is a reputational boost for you? Fourthly is relationship. So, this is the trust that you're going to be there the next time. You're going to remember that they helped you. You're not going to disappear when you don't need anything. And then lastly is kind of personal. It's like being seen as a person and not as a job. So it's gratitude. It's this small kindness. It's a remembered detail. So that's like getting in there and being quite personal with the person and showing that you have an interest in them because you remember these things.
I think it's so helpful to have those currencies laid out. People too often think of money as the way you can influence people at work and not those right? 5. Correct. Mm-hmm. And the problem is most of us walk into a influence conversation with limited currencies. We don't realize that we could use all 5 of those or different versions. And if the other person doesn't value the one that we're offering or the ones we're comfortable using, we're not very effective at influencing them. And sometimes we don't really know why. So what I find valuable in the research is that different people value different currencies. The mission currency moves some people enormously. They'll do almost anything for the mission. I was just with the team this week where they were very high on what we would call altruism, and they really cared about the mission and they would talk about the mission of the organization. But other people don't run on that at all. They run on visibility. They run on the relationship or on whether you could make their week easier. So this team was having a hard time. You could see that they would go out and talk to people from another part of the organization about the mission, and it wasn't quite resonating. So the question I think really great influencers are asking almost unconsciously is, what does the person I'm talking to, what do they value? And do I have any of that to offer? That's why sometimes when I'm working with teams, right, they really, I make them look at things as an exchange. What input do you need from your colleague and what output are you giving them? If a team is a system, a group of people working together, what do you need from your colleagues and what are you giving from them? How often do we maybe go to a peer and say, hey, I need someone from your team to work on this initiative for me? and the peer is supposed to do it versus saying, hey, I would really value it if you could get someone on your team to help me with this. And this is the benefit you're going to get. It's not transactional. It's just more real. So asking people, what are you giving back? And, don't use the language of currencies because that would be creepy and weird. But will the work I'm doing, is it going to make their life easier? Does it connect with what they value and what's important to them?
Yeah. One thing that I think is really interesting when you start watching for it is when you see leaders who tend to get the most things done, these are the people that move stuff. They're oftentimes using this word currencies that other people aren't using. And I think especially relationship currency and this personal currency, which these for most of our listeners are maybe even going to sound a little bit odd. Like, what does that mean? Got to continue thinking about that. And those two are very widely underdeployed. And, almost everybody is offering task help, and you can see how visibility gets dangled out there a lot, but almost nobody's paying in that patient accumulated kind of trust that comes from showing up consistently.
That is true. It's interesting, and this might sound a bit sexist, but many of the executive women I coach, I notice they are a bit more fluent in personal currency and relationship currency. They don't think of it as power or influence. They consider it connection or doing what's right, because women are rewarded and expected to be helpful. But it can give them an advantage because those actions build up over time and can create a bit of leverage. And the leaders who run on quiet leverage are usually invisible until you take them out and then everything stops working. And you're like, well, what happened? And it was the person who had that relationship currency, if you will.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I've seen that same pattern, Stacey, even in the relationships that I have with clients, right? It's the people that I'm willing to go hardest for, are the people who know a bit about me, that I've worked with for a while. I know their children's names and they know my dog's names, it's those small things. I think for me, those people stand out, and they are quite honestly, typically female, or more often, I should say female in many cases.
So well, I think you and I have a colleague. I have someone who, when they send me a text or they ask me to do something, even if I'm not sure it's right or I disagree, I am likely to do it because that relationship has built up over time and I trust them as a human, right? That is different. Well, the other thing I just want to add that Cohen and Bradford work really showed is that this idea of compounding, which we've talked about before. It's that pull leadership, if you will, compounds over time. Every time you offer something to another person that they value, it builds up a little bit. And every time you offer them the wrong currency, if you will, or ask something without offering anything, it costs a little. So people might do it in the moment, but you're withdrawing from that account like we talked about. And then all of a sudden you sort of think, well, I don't really know why this relationship isn't working, but it's because you've taken something from the relationship and you haven't given it to it. So that gap over years can become enormous. The leaders we look at age 45 and think, how do they get all that done? That's because they were doing the math right at age 28, or they've been in the organization a long time and they've learned how to support and give people what they need or value over time. It's also why leaders who come in from another company at a senior level struggle so much to be successful. They may have the capability, they may be credible in their space, but they don't have that pull that's built up over years. They don't have that source of power, if you will.
Yes. So, Stacey, to the point of the podcast, you might try this 3 experiments as always. And, we say, look, just pick the one that lands on the part of this that you most felt within yourself. So don't try to run all 3. This is not a syllabus.
No, strongly seconding that. Completely agree.
So let me offer one up, and that's simply like the currency question. So pick a person that you're trying to influence right now. It could be a peer, somebody above you, could be a vendor, could be a partner, anyone who doesn't report to you. anyone where like your title is not traveling, it's not helping you. And I sit down for 5 minutes and answer one question. What do they actually want from me that has nothing to do with my title or the thing that I'm asking for? Run through those 5: mission, task help, visibility, relationship, personal. Most of the time, oftentimes, the answer isn't something obvious. It's perhaps something that you've not been offering. Very likely it's something that you've not been offering. And as we said, often it's relationship currency, the things that you've not done, the boring, small, consistent showing up, that builds the account. Sometimes it's visibility. They're hungry to be seen by your boss, and you can give that to them for free. The answer here, and I think an important point, the answer isn't useful as a list. It's useful as the one thing that you can offer in the next 2 weeks. So don't think about creating a long list of these and thinking, how do I bombard them with all of these currencies? But like, what's the one thing that you can offer in the next couple of weeks? What's one specific investment that you can make in that relationship?
I love that. Love that.
The rule I would say for this one to get it right, is if your answer is, I'm actually not sure what they want, then there's your experiment before the experiment. Like, go find out and go buy them coffee. Ask them what's going on for them, what's on their plate, listen to them. What people want tends to always be there. Just most of us haven't really gotten interested and learned what that is.
Isn't it amazing when you, Cade, work with leaders and you ask them when they're talking about someone and you say, well, what's important to that other person? How often we don't actually know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're all guilty of that, but and it comes up so often. People don't know.
Yeah. So here's one I'll offer, which is the pull move. So in the next week, pick a conversation where you normally, if you're honest, reach for your authority. You'd be more directive. You'd pull on the fact that, you have a title, kind of be more declarative or telling someone what you need them to do, even if you're saying it, nicely. So in that case, I'd say try the pull version instead. Frame the problem differently. Ask for their thinking before you give yours. Maybe let a couple people stake their position before you do. What you're going to notice is, and we said this back earlier, I think a couple episodes ago, maybe in 14, is that this is a bit of the speak last move, right? It's in that same family. This is the conversation. You're trying to move it further by actually holding on to your opinion and bringing it in later, because you've stopped pulling things towards you. The people you're trying to influence are now working on the problem rather than you telling them what to do.
I love that one. One more in the spirit of offering up 3. And, this is kind of, think of like, this is the other room. And this is for people who really want to play a longer game. And by what we mean by the other rooms, like find that other room, a project or an initiative, somewhere where your title doesn't carry. Doesn't matter. It could be cross-functional. To the example you made, Stacey, it could be a nonprofit, a community board. It could be a volunteer thing, just somewhere where no one can be made to do anything because you said so. And then go try to be useful there. Like, and so in doing that, it's you're learning more about the currencies. You're developing that range of what might work in that other room. Build that muscle in a place where there are no shortcuts. Your title can never be used as a trump card. It's one of those things you really can only learn by doing it. The move that you learn in that other room is a move that scales. Because the leaders with the most pull are the ones that we see go the distance, right? And I want this to land, like the skill of moving people without authority over the course of a career, like that's not a soft skill. It is the skill. The senior leaders that we've worked with, they have it. True. And the ones that get to the top without it tend to come apart at some point because the next level, it is all that. I remember I had one client, I was working with the senior leaders, and then they said, hey, would you come in and would you work with some of our newly hired MBAs? And challenging. And I remember having this conversation with them about how actually, as you acquire more power, it's actually the influence that you have to use more of. And that was hard for them to imagine. And I said, think about your CEO. think about the people that he is attempting to influence and the power that they have. He cannot use his title in the halls of government. He can't use his title in conversations with other CEOs. And so even at the most powerful levels, that ability to generate pull and influence and using those currencies, it's incredibly important.
It is. Wow, that's a great example. And I'm sure it took them a little while to figure that one out. So these ones, the currency question, the pull move, the borrowed rumor spaces, some great things to try this week. Cade, next week, we're going to be picking this up because we're going to be talking about a conversation that people often run into, which is what happens when you get one of these moves wrong, because every leader stumbles, let's be honest. And whether that stumble builds trust or burns down comes down to almost entirely what do you do after the stumble. So next week, we're going to talk about the graceful stumble and how you own what went wrong without letting it own you.
That'll be a fun one. All right, Stacey, thank you. We'll see you then.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to You Might Try This, brought to you by EDC and Edgewise Media. To learn more about the podcast, visit youmightTryThis.com or connect with us on social media.